Hi, welcome to the HDR tutorial brought to you by Photographer Overnight. HDR stands for High Dynamic Range, which I like to call getting a perfect exposure across the picture. It means you don't have any areas of your picture that are blown out or overexposed, or any areas that are too dark to see detail or underexposed. A picture like this requires several different exposures of the same image, which I like to create from one raw file rather than taking the separate pictures with a tripod because the different images never match up quite perfectly. So first we're going to open up our raw file with a program like Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, and then we'll be able to adjust the exposure using these sliders here. So for the first image, we're going to adjust the exposure of the sky until it's where we want it. And then we're going to adjust the color temperature to make it more blue. So we adjust this first image until the sky is perfect, and then we're going to come down here to save the image as a JPEG. And we're going to add an extension on the image name so we can differentiate between our different exposures, and we'll call this one Sky. Then make sure you're saving the file as a JPEG and use the highest quality, and then click Save. Now with the same raw file open, we're going to create a different exposure to use for the water in the picture by adjusting the exposure slider again until we see the details of the water. And I'm also going to slide the recovery slider to the top because it brings back the detail of the highlights in our image. And then I'm turning the fill light off because fill light is used for brightening up the shadowy areas, but we'd like to keep the definition of the waves. And we need to warm up the color temperature again to get a nice orange glow. And then we'll just darken this up a little more so we can see the details of the water. And then we'll click Save Image again, this time naming it Water, and click Save. Then with the same raw file open, we're going to create a third exposure for the ground. So we'll just adjust the exposure again and take the recovery back down to normal because we like the highlights in the sand. And I'm bringing the fill light up to brighten the shadowy areas of the ground. And once you have the ground looking exactly how you'd like it, you'll click Save Image again, and this time name it with the extension Ground, and click Save. Lastly, with the same raw file open, we're going to adjust the exposure for the bride, and we'd like her to be more lit up. And I'm taking the fill light back down because I like to see the detail of the dress. And I'm going to adjust the brightness just to get her a little brighter. And then we'll click Save one more time and name this one Bride, and then click Save. And this is the perfect way to get your different parts of your picture exposed exactly how you want them by creating 4 different images. And then we're done using the raw program, so I'm going to cancel out of here. And then we're going to grab our 4 images we've just created and open them in Photoshop. Now I highly recommend you learn about using layers and masks in Photoshop before you begin this next part, or it might not make any sense. You can learn layers and masks step by step in the Photographer Overnight program on our website at howtostartphotography.com. So I'm just going to get all of these images a little smaller so we can see what we're doing here. And make sure you have the arrow tool selected so we can drag the images on top of each other as different layers. I like to keep my bright subject as the bottom layer and bring all the other layers on top. So first we're going to drag the sky image onto the picture and match it up with the picture underneath. And you can turn the layer on and off with this eyeball icon over here to see if your layer is matching up perfectly. Then we're going to create a mask on this layer by clicking the mask button here. And I talk more about using masks in the training program that you can purchase at photographerovernight.com or howtostartphotography.com. But masks are essentially a way to block out a layer's effect on your image by painting with a black brush, or you can bring back the effect by painting on the mask with a white brush. But for the sky layer, we're going to use a gradient on the mask to gradually mask out the sky layer on the bottom of our picture. You can see where we have black on the layer mask, the layer has been turned off. Now Control Plus will zoom in for us so we can see the picture more clearly. And I used a gradient because the only thing left to mask out on this top layer now is the bride's head. And you can do this by using a soft black brush, but I'm actually going to wait until I have all of my layers over here so I can mask them all out at once and save a lot of time. So we're going to come over to our ground image and make sure you have the arrow tool selected again so you can drag it onto the other picture as a new layer. Then we'll match the layer up with the others, and you can use the layer eyeball to see if you have it matched up. And I'm going to drag the ground layer underneath the sky layer so we can see the new sky. And then we'll turn the ground layer on and off to see if we have it matched up perfectly, and you can nudge it with the arrow keys on your keyboard. And finally, we'll drag over our water layer and match it up with the others. If you see anything jumping up and down when you turn on and off the layers, you'll know that your layer is slightly off. And watch whether the layer jumps up or down when you turn the layer on, and then move it in the opposite direction to match up with the layer underneath. Remember, you can nudge the layer by using the arrows on your keyboard as long as you have the arrow tool selected. So now that we have our 4 layers on the image, we're going to mask out the parts of the layers that we don't want to see. So we'll create a mask on our water layer here, and then I'm going to take a black brush and just use 100% opacity to get rid of the water layer on the ground here. But we also need to take this dark layer off of our subject, and I'll show you another method of doing that. We're going to use the selection tool here and right-click to choose the magnetic lasso because this tool can help you find the edges of your subject so you don't have to click every little spot we want it to track around her. And then I go around the entire subject to select her. But we don't want to take the water layer off the water between her arms, so we'll have to take those parts out of the selection. You do that by clicking Alt and then clicking around the place you'd like to remove from your selection. So we'll get rid of the sky up here too because we'll be using this selection on all the layers. Now we've got our subject selected, we can fill in the masks of all these layers with black, so it will take off the effects of those layers on our subject. We do this by hitting Shift F5, which brings up this Fill pop-up window, and then our foreground color is black, so with foreground color selected we hit OK to fill in with black. Then we'll select the mask on the water layer and hit Shift F5 and hit OK. And you can see we filled in this mask with black to take the effect of the water layer off our subject as well. Now we'll come down to our ground layer here, and because I haven't created a mask yet, if I click the mask button down here now, you'll see that it creates a mask outside of our selection, which isn't what we want. So we're actually going to come up to the selection menu and click Inverse to invert the selection. And then we see the black mask over our subject. You can see by turning on and off the ground layer that the only part it's affecting now is the ground, and our water layer is only affecting the water. But if you hit Control Plus to zoom in and see more closely, you can see that the edge is really harsh and needs some work. This halo effect is really common in HDR, and it takes a lot of work to get it perfect. But this is where masking comes in so handy. You can take off the effect or put it back on just by using a black or white brush on the mask. So just figure out which layer is causing the effect you want to get rid of or add more of, and paint black or white on that mask. We'll have to raise the hardness of the brush so we can get the edges without having a soft halo around everywhere we brush, and lower the opacity to make your changes less noticeable. You'll also need a very small brush to get these slivers on the edges. If this tutorial is going over your head, I explain everything I'm using from the very beginning in my Photoshop tutorials that come with the Photographer Overnight program. You can check it out at howtostartphotography.com. In the program, you'll learn not only how to get great photos and edit them in Photoshop, but how to make money in photography and get more clients. In the Photoshop tutorials, you'll learn to fix under or overexposed images, how to use layers and masks, how to create and use Photoshop actions, how to fix white balance, bring out the colors, and get great black and whites. I also teach you how to design flyers, wedding invitations, and other announcements so you can start selling your work. Head on over to howtostartphotography.com to learn more about the program and watch a free video about it. Okay, so after we've cleaned up all the edges of our subject, we're going to save this as a PSD first so we can always come back and make changes to it later. Then we're going to flatten it and save it as a JPEG. Now with the image flattened, I can run one of my favorite actions on it that comes from the coffee shop blog online, and I'll show you how to download and use actions in the Photographer Overnight program. And once the action is done running, I can adjust it to taste. We've got a soft color pop effect, a vivid effect that's a little darker and more vibrant, an urban desaturating effect, and a bright one. I'm going to use both the soft layer and the vivid layer, but I'm going to fill the soft layer mask in with 50% gray to tone it down, and then paint with a 100% opacity white brush to bring back the effect on my bride to brighten her up. Then I'm going to reduce the opacity of the vignette layer to tone it down a bit, and brush over the vignette mask with black on the ground here to get rid of more of the vignette down here. Then I adjust the layers to taste, flatten the image, and save. And there we have an HDR image. For more great tutorials and photography tips, head over to photographerovernight.com or howtostartphotography.com, and thanks for watching.